Hey, how y'all doing? Jose Sierra Jr., Two Countries, One Lie, here with my son Bo Sierra in Illinois. And more educate and unite. We're trying to get as much information into your hands that you've never seen or only heard of, but never knew the details. Don't forget our meeting coming up next April 2017, La Junta, at the San Antonio College at McAllister Hall. That's when I'll get into it knee deep, and we're going to have experts there. We're going to have lawyers, professors, and everybody to tell you the whole deal about what really happened and what we can do about it. But today we're going to recap a little bit on the. I know we did a treaty of Hidalgo, Guadalupe Hidalgo, and I'm going to go just a recap over this. But we want to do this segment today. First of all, the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo, as you well know, Article 8 and 9 were the specific articles to give you or our ancestors whatever little protection that they could be afforded. Because as you well know, the Congress, before it passed that treaty, softened it quite a bit because it was too strong in favor of the Tejanos. That couldn't happen. They didn't want that. They made it not happen by taking all that language out, weakening the Article 8 and Article 9, and at the same time deleting Article 10, that not only was probably the one thing that we really needed, but that was the guarantee and honoring the land grants forever. That had to go, and those people in the Congress of that time got rid of it because there was no way they were going to put up with Mexicans owning land forever and not being able to challenge that land. So, anyways, that's the part we had last segment. But now we're talking about 1849, which was about a year later. In 1848, that treaty was sent to the Congress, negotiated by Mexico and the United States on behalf of all of the Tejanos that own that land, your ancestors and my ancestors. My great-grandfather 5 times removed, and your families also have the same situation with being a descendant of those people. Well, what happens in 1849, there in this treaty they had one little sentence that really makes a difference in today's world, legally. Because it said if you stayed on that land between 1848 and 1849 for 1 year, you would automatically become a U.S. citizen. Wow. That was very important. Well, they didn't honor it, but it was in the language of the treaty. And at that time, they tried to soften it also by making the Congress make that decision. But that language is in that treaty. They wanted to soften it by allowing the Congress to have a say who and who wouldn't be a U.S. citizen. We'll get to that in a minute, in a couple seconds here, but I'm going to keep going. So when 1849 came around, ancestors were still on their lands, and the 1 year had already come and gone, and they technically were U.S. citizens. Problem here is, how do you prove that? You see, because in 1848 they told all of the Tejanos, if you stay on that land for 1 year, you're going to be a U.S. citizen. But you can leave within that 1 year and go back to Mexico, and you're going to be a Mexican citizen, not a U.S. citizen. That's very vital in this argument. This argument about citizenship is going to get hot and heavy here. Now, I'm going to go into that in a second. So, at that time, 1849 came, and 1850 came, and guess what? People like our descendants were having nothing but nightmares with the Anglos because they constantly were being challenged about their citizenship. Even though they owned that land, they didn't want to be recognized as a U.S. citizen. What happened is, it got fragmented. And it actually started out in California, where they started tempering what a real citizen would look like. If you were Mexican and dark, no U.S. citizenship for you, even though you own that land. But if you are Mexican and light, you'd be accepted as a U.S. citizen. Smacks of racism, smacks of an unjust way of doing things, but those were our forefathers back in that day that ran the country. All of these things I'm telling you are in books, and they're also, you can go to websites. You can go to Wikipedia, which is like the new encyclopedia on the web, and you can find all these facts available. So, in 1849, if you were a citizen, allegedly, by the treaty terms, and you were a Mexican, you had problems. It's one of the reasons I needed to go back and find out, how do we prove this? Up till then, nobody had ever discovered what we discovered at Two Countries, One Lie. And that is, how do you prove citizenship now for our ancestors in 1849? Not easy to do. It's not like they had, courthouses everywhere with driver's licenses and DMVs. These things were difficult to prove back in those days. They're even harder to prove today. But one night I had an epiphany. That's like an awakening. There was a document that had been overlooked for 100 and some years by all the Tejanos until we figured it out. And that, my friends, is this. This little document. This document is a Cameron County record of the people that paid taxes in 1851. I have 3 documents here. I have two listed to show you. This was found in the archives of Austin, Texas, by a very smart gentleman named Elmer Sierra. And his tenacious investigation found these documents. With his digital camera, he took pictures and brought them back. And now we know that the records are there. This is the smoking gun of your ancestors and mine, who were U.S. citizens, because this document has, in the yellow lines, it has my ancestor's name, Jose Manuel Cavazos. And that proves that he was paying poll taxes, 50 cents to the county of Cameron in the state of Texas. The key to poll taxes is it was proof of citizenship, because that's who was paying the taxes in 1851, 52, 54, and those are the documents that I have. So if he's paying poll taxes, then he's a U.S. citizen. Then the United States had no business negotiating on his behalf or any other of the descendants, ancestors' behalf with Mexico, because they violated their 5th and 14th Amendments. And that is a fact that the U.S. government knows and is trying to stop you from knowing. But we're turning it loose. We want you to be educated. We want you to unite, because this time we're using their discriminatory practices against them. We're using their own devious way of keeping us down, paying poll taxes so we couldn't vote. You had to pay the 50 cents, and 50 cents in 1851 was a lot of money just to have the right to vote. But our ancestors paid it. Jose Manuel Cavazos was the 2nd generation of Jose Narcisco Cavazos, which was the land grant originator. He was the one that purchased the land, but passed away, I think, around 1893. Well, this man was still alive, and he was paying his poll taxes. And in 1851 and 1854...
Maria.
What?
That's Maria.
Oh.
The other one is Maria.
Maria.
Yeah.
Okay. What I'm saying to you is, this proves that they were U.S. citizens. And the United States had no business negotiating a treaty on their behalf. They violated their 5th and 14th Amendments. This is vital. This is key. Because if you understand this and the law, now you have something to fight for, and you have something to fight with. There's not a judge in the United States that's going to say that this is not true. They have no choice but to admit the obvious and the facts. But the problem with this is they have figured out how to stop this. And they use a legal term called statute of limitations. We're going to get to that in a few minutes too. So let me continue on. If the 1849 fulfillment of the Articles 8 and 9, and we have poll taxes that are proof that our ancestors were U.S. citizen, then we know this was a scam, this was wrong, this had no business taking place. In history, it should have never happened, and it was a violation of our civil rights. I don't care what year it is. It still was an illegal act. And I want to tell you, I have a book here that I am in the process of reading. And this author's name is Martha Menchaca, an excellent author. I think she's amazing. This lady wrote this book. You guys all need to buy this book, or read this book, or share this book. This was the naturalization of Mexican immigrants. This goes all the way back from the 1830s and 1840s, all the way to probably current times. I'm not that far yet in the book, but I've read a lot of that era, the 1848 era. And this book shows you the confusion, the chaos, and all the illegal acts that were created by judging Mexicans and making Mexicans have to prove that they were citizens over and over, and judging them by the color, their shade, the color of their skin. If it was light, they were probably granted U.S. citizenship. But if it was dark, tough luck. You ain't getting in because you're a dark Mexican, which meant that you had Indian blood. So you see, this book is vital to this information because this is recorded history, and this lady did an excellent, superb job of resourcing it and told the real truth of what really happened. But it shows the confusion and chaos that our ancestors went through in those times. There's one example after another. An assistant governor of Texas who was actually taken and thrown out of office because he was a Mexican. I mean, it's all in this book. It's amazing history, but it just gives you an understanding of what your ancestors had to deal with. It's the atrocity of being able to not be able to be an equal, and they just kept putting these roadblocks in front of us, and we literally didn't have a chance. Great book. You've got to read this book. It's an amazing book. So where does that leave us? In this book, I think she said 90% of the Tejanos stayed on the land for 1 year or more. That means only 10% went back to Mexico. Those 10% may not be able to prove that they were U.S. citizens. But the rest of you have the same opportunity that we had. You need to hire people that can help you, or you need to do the research yourself. And you need to go to the Austin Archives and dig up the poll tax for your ancestor. And once you find him, whatever county you were, this happens to be my ancestor, it was Cameron County, but there's a slew of counties in Texas, and you need to find your ancestor out of your land grant, be it the Longoria, the Bailly, or whatever, and find the poll tax evidence, because that is living proof that he was a U.S. citizen, which brings the fight right dead center to the United States and Texas. Texas is not off the hook either. We don't talk much about Texas because we know there's other organizations that are fighting Texas. Our concentration is basically the United States. We come to 1868, about maybe 20 years later, And we find out, got another problem going on. For 20 years, there's nothing but complaints from 1848 to 1868 from our ancestors saying the lands were stolen. The lands were stolen, they were coerced, they were driven off the land, they were squatted off the land. You can call it what you want. It was open season on Mexicans. And those Anglos knew how to do it. They brought their 6 guns and their rifles, and they didn't play with those people down there. They literally killed, hung, and shot a lot of them. All I'm saying to you is, for 20 years, from 1848 to 1868, our ancestors fought and had nobody on their side. And then they put a treaty in there again. In 1848, Mexico and the United States got together again. And they said, they've got too many complaints. Too many complaints. All these Mexican people are complaining that their lands were stolen. We don't even know who they are. We don't even know if they're U.S. citizens. So they created another treaty. The treaty was called the Treaty of Naturalization of 1868-1869 by Mexico and the United States. In that book I told you about that Miss Menchaca wrote, it told you about the chaos in this open border in those days. There wasn't border custom offices, there wasn't border agents. It was an open border. You could cross on a daily basis and nobody would bother you unless you were in the wrong part of the town, or, you know, if it was an Anglo versus Mexican issue. It was dangerous for Mexicanos. It was very dangerous. So that border was open. It was wide open. But the United States got tired of all these complaints and they said, hey man, I don't even know if these people are U.S. citizens. They keep complaining that their land was stolen. We don't know who they are. There was no records kept other than the complaints that they had. The only records we had were Spanish land grants. Guess what the United States didn't want? Yeah, you got it. Didn't want to even recognize Spanish land grants as being lawful or legal. Why? Because Mexicans own them. Who wants Mexicans and Spaniards around? We want this land for the white people, the Anglos. So they were really fed up with all the complaints around that year of 1868, 1869. So the two countries got together and they said, we got to have a way to verify if these people are actually really citizens. So they made the Tejanos, or the Mexicanos, or the Spaniards, whatever you'd like to call us at those moments in time, and they said, prove to us that you have been living where you say you have been living for the last 2 to 5 years. If you can't, then we can't declare you a U.S. citizen. That was probably one of the biggest moves to try to create a naturalization treaty to accept our people in a legal manner, because it was just too chaotic. And I would have loved to have Miss Menchaca with us, but she's not going to be able to be at our meeting. I wanted her to discuss that, but that's okay. We're gonna just tell you that if you get this book and you help her out a little bit, you'll see that all that information is in here. I mean, there's a lot of information to current time, so I'm just targeting that era because that's important to us in our fight and our quest for justice. So, this treaty, Tejanos had to prove citizenship. How easy do you think that was to tell somebody, I've been living here for 2 to 5 years? Remember, it's 1868. How do you prove it in those days? There was no driver's licenses. Nobody paid NICOR, or natural gas. Nobody paid electricity. Nobody had bills. It was very difficult to prove that you were there for the last 2 to 5 years. If you lived in Mexico, there was a certain requirement. I don't remember which way it goes, 2 to 5 years either way. And if you lived in the U.S., you had to verify that you were there 2 to 5 years. I get them mixed up. But you get the idea. I'm not perfect in all this information, but I'm telling you, these are the facts. These facts are that they had to prove citizenship. And if they couldn't do that, they were out of luck. How important is that? Well, remember, when they lost their lands, they went to the United States and Texas and complained that through chicanery, which is this word, chicanery is a term that's used for illegal gotten gains. How do you do that in those days? It's easy. Chicanery is trickery, deception. A white man walks up with a deed and he's got an X on it and said, that's a Mexican signature. And another white man working in the office there, the land office, says, okay, great, here's your new deed. You own the land now. It was about that easy in some places, in some counties. I'll say most counties. Because no one questioned a white man. Gotta remember, we're talking Jim Crow era. We're talking racist, and we're talking racism at its finest in the Texas in those eras. So what happens is, this word was in full swing. Chicanery, trickery, deception, squatting, driving people off, paying them pennies on the dollar for thousands of acres, and telling them if you don't take it, you ain't gonna get nothing, and you're gonna be dead, or you're gonna be gone, and you might as well take something. They were coerced off their lands. They had no choice because the white man wasn't going nowhere, and he was determined to get your land. So if you go today in the court in Austin, Texas, and you go up there into the county office, and you say, give me the deeds of all these lands that are now owned today, oh, they're all perfectly legal. Yeah, after 100 years of sitting there, and you know, once people got accepted to these lands, it was official. They were the owners of the land. But how they got that land has always been a problem. It has been a question. It has been something that Tejanos know was wrong. I'm not saying every piece of that land, but I'm telling you a large amount of it, I'll say over 90%, was stolen from our ancestors. Or they were actually literally driven off of that land. And they had to surrender it. Then they'd walk into the land office and say, there ain't nobody living on that land, it's my land now. Anglo? No problem. Other Anglo stamps the book, legal. If you did that today, you'd be in jail. Because there's laws today. Laws? Yeah, we can't do that. I can't go down to any one of these big ranches and say, I own this land. I've got a deed with your name on it. See how far that goes today. Why? Because the Anglos now know that after they stole the land, they had to keep the land. And the way they kept the land was to make it legal. And it was impossible for us to prove anything. And that's what happened. I don't care what they say. I'm telling you, that was probably the real truth of how we lost our lands. It isn't really a very good picture to paint of how this state was formed. But that's the history. And I can tell you one thing. Being at Tejano and my mother and father, following them all over the state of Texas when I was very little, not for a long time, just for a short period of time, I learned that we weren't the only ones that had been hoodwinked, that had been robbed of their lands. And now it's just accepted fact. Get over it. Who cares? It's history. Oh, yeah, really? What if your name was today one of those ranches? I won't use the name. But what if that was the tables were turned and a Mexican owned it and took it the way I just said? Do you think they'd say, oh yeah, get over it? No. They ain't going to get over it because they know it was an illegal act and an illegal deed. How much time we got, Bo?
All right.
Okay. So, you can see the picture I'm painting here. They had to prove their citizenship over and over and over. They had to make decisions about how to combat the chicanery. They hired a lawyer and the lawyer would fleece them. The lawyer would go to court and say, you lost. And they'd have to give them 2,000, 3,000 acres because they didn't have the money to pay them. There are so many stories and so many books written about the injustice of Texas, and nobody wants to talk about it. Nobody wants to deal with it. Two Countries, One Lie is going to make it happen. We're going to make the conversation come back to life. It's time to start talking about it. It's time to talk about the injustice. It's time that we get justice and now show the real truth of what really happened. I hope you enjoyed my presentation. We will be back in another week, and we're going to try to keep making these presentations and keep the subject matter flowing. So to educate our people and to unite you once and for all to get justice. So thank you very much. Two Countries, One Lie, Bo Sierra and myself. Thank you, Jose Sierra. Have a great time. Talk to you guys later.